Even if I don't see progress today, I'll keep going. Even if it feels pointless right now, I trust in what God has promised. Because breakthrough happens not when you feel ready, but when you stay faithful. Welcome to the 5 by the Fire podcast, brought to you by Freedom Story Media and the Ordered Chaos Club. I'm your host, Pastor Fury, and I get the pleasure of also being the executive director of the Unshackled Network, this family of missionaries that exists to help the marginalized experience freedom in Jesus through equipping spirit-empowered disciple makers called to the forgotten. Now, in season 1, we discussed the day's passages briefly every day. In season 2, we did daily scripture meditation. And now, in season 3 of this podcast, I'm sharing weekly thoughts from the Lord that I believe are going to bless somebody, hopefully you today. Now, if you're reading along with us in the McShane Bible reading plan, the passages for the day are 2 Samuel 15, 2 Corinthians 8, Ezekiel 28, and Psalm 3 and 4. I encourage you to go ahead and read those chapters, so give the Lord the first 15 minutes of maybe this half hour you're going to set aside for Him today. You can pause the podcast now and come on back when you're done. Today, we're talking about how to achieve breakthrough in your life and in the work of your hands. Here's the main idea. Breakthrough happens not when you feel ready, but when you stay faithful. There's another word for consistency or faithfulness that we struggle with. You know it well, it's that pesky D word, discipline. Not the discipline to grind until you burn out, but the steady, faithful discipline to keep showing up, especially when you're not seeing immediate results. We'll explore how discipline and not motivation carried the Israelites to victory when they circled Jericho under God's command in Joshua. Often in life, we face the temptation to give up because we're not seeing immediate results. But in God's kingdom, victory comes through persistent faithfulness. Today we'll look at how the story of the Israelites circling Jericho provides a powerful example of how God's ways may not always make sense to us, but our job is to keep showing up. So let's set the scene a bit here in Joshua 6. The Israelites had been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and they finally reached the promised land. But their entry was blocked by the heavily fortified city of Jericho. Humanly speaking, they had no chance of conquering it. But then God gave Joshua some unusual instructions. He says in Joshua 6, march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. In Joshua 6, 3-4. The Israelites had to march around the city walls once a day for 6 days without seeing anything happen. No cracks in the walls, no signs of weakening, just repetitive, seemingly pointless action. Imagine how strange and demoralizing this would have been. Yet they remained disciplined, faithfully executing the instructions day after day. This kind of obedience was an act of trust and discipline and not a result of motivation. Why would God ask them to do this? They didn't know. How long would it take for the walls to fall? They weren't told. In Joshua 6:14 it says, so on the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Finally, you guys, after 7 days of disciplined marching, something happened. On that 7th day, they marched around the city 7 times. The trumpets sounded, the people shouted, and the walls collapsed. Their consistent, faithful obedience led to an extraordinary victory, because breakthrough happens not when you feel ready, but when you stay faithful. Now let's pause and unpack the main point that I think we can pull out of this passage. The Israelites' victory, it wasn't the result of fleeting motivation, but long-term discipline. They didn't win because they felt like warriors every day they woke up. Because that they saw progress after each time that they marched. They won because they consistently showed up and trusted God's process. It's easy to get excited about a new goal, creative project, or spiritual discipline, whether that's starting a prayer routine, launching a new creative endeavor like a new podcast, or even pushing forward in your ministry. But the excitement eventually wears off. What happens when you hit day 2, day 5, day 20, and there are no visible results? Like the Israelites, God may have us marching around the walls in our lives and it might feel repetitive or like nothing is happening. But that's when discipline, not motivation, carries us through. Discipline says, even if I don't see progress today, I'll keep going. Discipline says, even if it feels pointless right now, I trust in what God has promised. In your creative work, your spiritual life, or your leadership journey, you will face days when the walls seem just as strong as they did when you started. But the secret to breaking through is that discipline keeps showing up, faithfully doing what God has asked of you. Why? Because breakthrough happens not when you feel ready, but when you stay faithful. So what's your Jericho right now? What walls seem impenetrable in your life? And what is God asking you to do in disciplined faith? Many creatives tell stories of how they were creatively blocked and searching for their next work of art's inspiration. But what happens to so many of those is not that they suddenly got motivated or inspired, but they instead just got to work. Sitting down with a piece of paper or in front of the blank canvas, sitting down at the piano or whatever the tool of creation is, it becomes the magical moment that victory is possible. Victory doesn't always show up with a fanfare or a celebrated proclamation, but many times it's simply the product of our simple obedience to show up and stay faithful, to step into the work in faith, trusting that as we walk out off the ledge, the bridge will appear one step at a time. The disciplined work of creating this podcast has been a good example of that for me. That first season, it was a real grind to show up each and every day, to write and record, believing that God was going to give me something new to chew on and to provide for you all. But that's the secret. It's faith. It's knowing that I will continue to grow in faithful obedience and diligence, and God will meet me there with the power from on high. That's where the magic happens, because breakthrough happens not when you feel ready, but when you stay faithful. So here's some things that you can do, some practical things to really practice discipline over motivation. Number 1, set a routine. The Israelites had a specific pattern that they followed each and every day. Whether it's prayer, creative work, or spiritual disciplines, set a consistent routine that will help you move forward each day. 2, focus on obedience, not outcomes. Trust God with the results. Your job is to stay faithful to what He's called you to. Just like the Israelites who had no idea when the walls would fall. And number 3, surround yourself with community. The Israelites marched together. Surround yourself now with people who can encourage your discipline, whether that's fellow believers or creative collaborators. You're more likely to keep going when you go together, because don't forget, breakthrough happens not when you feel ready, but when you stay faithful. Thank you guys for joining me on this episode of the 5 by the Fire podcast. You can sign up to receive each and every week's devotionals via email at unshacklednetwork.org/Bible. Make sure you rate the podcast wherever you're listening so that others can discover it and be blessed by it as well. And hey, if you'd like to leave a comment on today's episode, maybe sharing how God has blessed you with it, you can do that if you're watching it on YouTube, right in the comments, or you can go to 5bythefire.org, where you'll also find the show notes for each episode. Today's episode, as is everyone, is sponsored by Freedom Story Media, where we tell stories to help you live a life of freedom and joy. You can also check out the Ordered Chaos Club. It's a place where we bring together Christian creatives ready to overcome challenges in their faith and art so that we can fully use our God-given talents, express our creativity with confidence, and make real progress toward our boldest creative goals this year. Sign up to receive the free 30-day journal, A Catalyst for Christ-Centered Creativity, at orderedchaosclub.com. Or you can join the waitlist for the community to lock in the lowest monthly pricing and be on the ground floor of launching this transformational community. Until next time, be blessed, be a blessing, and keep creating for God's glory. Peace.